지금으로부터 16년 전 2020년의 미래를 미리 예견해서 화제가 된 미래학자가 있습니다. 바로 영국 인디펜던트지의 비즈니스 금융부장인 해미시 맥레이인데요. 2010년 현재 해미시 맥레이는 어떤 미래를 그리고 있는지 한번 들어보시겠습니다. Hello, Mr. McNay. Thank you for joining us. So, first, I'd like to ask how you feel in Korea. As I know, this is the second time to visit Korea, right? So, 25 years has passed from your first visit. So, I wonder, what are you surprised at the most, or what part is the most different from what you thought?
Well, 25 years is quite a long time, and it's an even longer time in Korea than it is in some of our older societies. I think three things are really utterly different. The first thing is that Seoul is very clean. It's very spruce and very smart, whereas 25 years ago it was hard-working but a little dusty. And so the people are much better dressed. And that leads to the second point, which is obviously the change in prosperity is enormous, enormous. And the third point is, I think, a little more subtle. It's very hard to make this judgment, but I feel that Korean people now are much more interested in the rest of the world and much more interested in the rest of the world's problems and opportunities than they were 25 years ago from the conversations I had then. Then they were sort of very focused. Now they want to look out to the world.
I cannot skip the questions about North Korea and South Korea. So these days, as you know, the tensions between two Koreas is very high because of Cheonan battleship incident. So these days, recently the South Korean government requested the UN Security Council to discuss the penalties against North Korea. So do you think this incident is a very critical turning point for a relationship between two Koreas?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm an economist. I'm not a political scientist. I have the impression, if I look at the way regimes changed in Europe after the collapse of the Soviet Empire, I have the impression that societies stick as they are for a long time, and then when the landslide happens, they move very quickly. Now, whether North Korea is in that position of about to have a landslide or not, I don't know. But I think that when regime change happens there, we will all be surprised at the speed at which it takes place.
So you said in your book the unification between the Koreas will happen by cooperation rather than takeover one by the other. So could you explain the detailed reason about that? Or do you think the upheaval in North Korea is not far from?
We have a model, which is the two Germanys, two societies which were the same people, pulled apart by politics, with a wall in between, and therefore developing in different ways, inevitably. So we have a model of how societies should reintegrate. And in the case of West Germany, it was extremely generous in financial terms towards East Germany, but maybe didn't listen enough to the East Germans. Now that, I think, gives some ideas as to how South Korea and North Korea should approach their eventual joining, as and when that happens. This is partly about money, but it's not just about money. It's about mutual respect. And I think that there will be some things that South Korea can learn from North Korean people. If not, I don't think there's much it can learn from the regime.
And the next question is, you stress that the global economic power is shifting from G7 to BRICS, and G20 is replacing the G20 as your main governing body these days. So especially after the financial crisis, we are in very rapid change. So I think this is a good opportunity for emerging countries. So, so what strategies do the emerging countries have in this G20 era?
I think that institutional change has now caught up with economic reality. And the G20 is a much more sensible way of trying to coordinate global policy than the G7. But I don't think we should put too much expectation on the G20. They're only politicians. They come together, they talk, that is very good. There may be some initiatives which are helpful. But I don't think we should say, we have the G20, it's all going to be all right. It's not, because the individual countries still have to be thoughtful and have wise policies, much wiser than we've had in Europe over the last few years, wise policies and cooperative policies. But I think that the G20 is a huge step forward, and I think that Korea's hosting of the G20 is a very good thing, because, of course, Korea itself is a model for economic development.
Now, as you said, the Korea is the host country in these years to G20 summit. So could you do some advice for Korea for success in G20 summit?
Oh, I think it would be presumptuous of me to give advice to Korea on how to host a summit. We did in London host the first G20 summit, which I think was broadly perceived as being a success. So we have a little experience of this. But I think that aside from the obvious, which is just making sure that the mechanics of the summit work well, I think the key point, the key thing that you are able to do by having the summit is to show your country and its success to the world. And I think that's wonderful, very important. But as to the detail, I think most other countries have huge confidence that all that will be run well.
Actually, I read in your book that China will be the largest country by 2030. So I understand that China will take over America. But, I just wonder, the China and U.S. has lots of conflicts these days. So it's kind of a course to such a trend. So do you agree with that view?
I think that it is inevitable that China will eventually become the world's largest economy. Now, the timing we cannot predict as to detail, but eventually, within the next 20 years, probably, certainly within the next 30 or 40 years, maybe, possibly, even within the next 10, but probably within about 20 years. Now, I think that is inevitable, and I think it is welcome, because it is much better than China in some way having some kind of economic disaster, another failed cultural revolution or something. So I think that is good news. But I think what will happen is we will moving to a more balanced world, a world where there are not just a few countries that are prosperous and successful, but gradually we are moving towards a whole world where the majority of people have comfortable and successful lives. Not greedy, not arrogant, but comfortable and successful. And I think if we can manage that transition to a world where it is a a more balanced world, then I think we can be very confident about the future. But it will be a difficult transition to make. And if you say to me, am I confident that we can make that transition perfectly, the answer is no. We will make mistakes, of course.
These days, actually you talk about the physical soundness in your panel discussion. So these days, Greece and Spain and Hungary got in trouble because of physical deficit. So how much it will affect the Europe and Euro's status?
Europe has, at one level, a crisis a little like the Asian debt crisis. Not quite the same, because nothing's ever quite the same. And it will recover from it. But I think that it is some European countries will not be able to pay their debts in full. They will not be able to pay 100 euro cents in the euro. And I think that accepting that will be very difficult. I think further that the euro itself will come under great pressure over the next 7 to 10 years, and I think there will be some countries that leave the eurozone. What I cannot possibly predict is whether it will be the weak currencies leaving the euro at the bottom or the strong currencies leaving at the top. I don't think we can say that.
The next question is, you describe the future in demographic point of view. So actually in Korea, the concerns about the falling birth rate and the aging of society is growing and growing. So is there any solution, or do you think the raising budget for child care and childbirth, like France, can be a solution for this problem?
I think that why women in effect, choose a particular size of family is terribly difficult to predict. What we do know from European experience and North American experience is that after a while the falling birth rates seem to bottom out. They don't go on falling forever. Now, why is that? I think that many women see their older sisters, maybe even their mothers, feeling that they would have liked to have had more children if it had been economically sensible and possible. And we in Britain reached some sort of bottom sometime in the early 90s. And since then, birth rates have started to recover. France has been the same. Scandinavia, birth rates are quite close to replacement rates. And this is not women going back to the kitchen. Women in Scandinavia very often have jobs. Now, how you do this is not easy to say. I think that you can have government policies that try and boost it, and they won't do any harm. They may help a little. I think you can remove barriers to women returning to work, which is important, and barriers so that you remove barriers that stop women from working part-time. Because very often a part-time foot in the labour market enables women to go back to work later on when their children are grown up. So I think that there are lots of small changes that can be made, which we have made in European countries, and which some countries, particularly Scandinavia, seem to have worked quite well. But there is no magic wand. There is no easy way of changing that.
Actually, this is the last question. You described the world in 2020 in 1994, right? So you predict the future after 26 years. So now, how do you imagine the world in 2046, which is 26 years later from now on?
Fortunately, I won't be alive to see it, so I can make this prediction with complete confidence, and no one can ever say I'm wrong because I won't be there. Look, I don't think that I don't think we will get the detail right. But I think that the big picture will be of a balanced world, a more balanced world. There may be some kind of catastrophe between now and then. And if you say, what kind of catastrophe? I think that all the present danger points of the world economy will remain danger points for another generation. There is no need for a danger point to become something worse, but there is always a possibility that governments will make mistakes. I mean, governments do make mistakes. But I think that we will have a world which is more balanced, more prosperous, more environmentally concerned, because there will be great environmental pressures, a world where population has started to level off about 10 billion, a world where the existing rich world, Korea, Europe, Japan, North America, will remain richer than it is now and will have a comfortable life. But the world will become more balanced because so much of the rest of the world will be rising to meet it. So I think a broadly positive view, but I did warn in that book when I wrote that as we lost the folk memory of the catastrophe of the first half of the 20th century, which we still remember. I still remember I was born in the first half of the last century. While we lose that realization that we can make terrible mistakes, then it'll be harder to achieve stability and maintain it.
Do you have any remark to say for our audience or viewers?
Well, let me say something to you and to the Korean people. I think you're lucky people. I know you're very hard-working, but I think you're lucky in what you have achieved and what you have been able to achieve at this time of human development. And I wish you, as a people, great good fortune for the undoubted difficult times that will be ahead. A world where very good